أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصلي اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, the subject of the end of time is a very vast subject, in not just in Islam, but there's also the Christians have a tradition. The Hindus also believe in the they have a cyclical view of things, but they definitely have signs when this particular age, which they see as a very dark age, they have a lot of signs that are similar to ours. Parents being mistreated by their own children, that commerce becomes widespread, everybody seeks after worldly things and forgets otherworldly things. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you're in a gathering and there's 20 people and you don't see anybody that puts the awe of God in you, then know that the hour is near. Because it used to be that there were a lot of people that wanted to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that was their main preoccupation in life, and other people knew that they were on the right path, and so they would honor them. Even if they themselves weren't doing that very thing, they would still honor them because they knew that that was the right thing to do. Whereas now, for most people, people see that as a waste of time. Bill Gates said that religion was an inefficient use of time. And there's a lot of people that have that's their view of pursuing God. So, like I said, there are many signs. The Jewish people have signs of the end of time. The Buddhists have signs of the end of time. And a lot of similar things. But as far as I can tell, and just looking at I've read different narratives from the different religions, I've never seen anything that comes close to all of the indications that the Prophet ﷺ gave, which shouldn't be surprising given that he was announcing really the beginning of his prophecy is announcing that اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر, the hour is drawing near, the moon has been split. The Prophet ﷺ said, بعثت أنا والساعة كهاتين, and then وضم سبابات وسطاه, that he said, my coming and the last hour are like these two, and he put his forefinger and the middle finger together like this, which doesn't mean that it's immediate in that way, but there's an immediacy about it. It's 1,400 years later, but if you look now about what we know about the amount of time that humans have been on this planet, which is much longer than the earlier peoples surmised. So it's still 1,400 years is nothing in relation to the amount of time that humans have been here on this planet. And then I didn't really go into the greater signs of the end of time. There are major signs. All the sughra signs come and they increase in severity. So for instance, the Muslims were talking about sufur an-nisa, immodest clothing, centuries ago, and complaining about that. So they saw that sign already emerging 1,000 years ago. But it gets more and more severe until the Prophet ﷺ said that you'll see kasiyatun ariyat, women that were clothed and naked at the same time. Because they didn't have things like spandex but now we know. There's people that are literally walking and they're clothed and naked at the same time. Their whole form is shown, and yet they still have clothing on. Kasiyatun ariyat. In fact, some of the ulama couldn't understand that. So they said, kasiyatun fid dunya, ariyatun fil akhirah. They're dressed here in this world, but they're naked in the next world. Everybody's naked in the next world. Everybody's raised up on the Yawm al-Qiyamah naked. So That's an amazing sign that the Prophet gave. Also, يَمْشُونَ فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ بَادِيَةُ أَفْخَاذِهِمْ. They walk in the marketplaces in shorts with their thighs exposed. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that. يَأْكُلُونَ كُلُّهُمْ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَى. All of them will be eating riba. يَأْتِي عَلَى النَّاسِ زَمَانٍ كُلُّهُمْ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَى. All of them will be consuming interest. And then he said, and the ones that don't consume it, يُصَابُ مِنْ غُبَارِهِ. They'll be covered in its dust. So even the money that we're using is our usurious notes, because it's fiat money, it's the central bank, it's all deficit financing, including Canada. And Canada's got some serious debt issues. They're not as bad as the U.S., but you have some serious problems in your national debt. So, and then the Prophet ﷺ talked about the major signs, and the Quran mentions some of the major signs also, like the dukhan that comes. There's a cloud, a gas or smoke that covers, and people see it clearly. And then you have some of the ulama say the first one, and some of the Sahaba mentioned this, the first one was the coming of the sun from the opposite side. So it will rise in the west, طلوع الشمس من مغربها, which would occur if there was a polar shift, and a polar shift has occurred before on our planet. So there was a time when the sun did rise in the west, historically, on our planet, we know that. And that still, like, it happens on Mercury. Mercury is having polar shifts. So polar shifts aren't uncommon on planets. But we haven't had a polar shift, obviously, in millennia. But we know from the geological formations that there has been polar shift. And Einstein was of the view that polar shift was very possible. If that happens, most people, a lot of people are going to die in a polar shift because it's such a radical freezing that takes place. And then the Dhuhr al-Dajjal, which comes, Nuzulu Isa, we believe in the coming of Jesus. And it's pretty hard to, the Quran mentions that he is a sign of the end of time. So his coming back is a sign. And our ulama almost unanimously have taken that literally, that it is a second coming of Isa. And the Christians also believe that. And the Jews believe in the coming of the Messiah. They don't accept Jesus as the Messiah, but they're also waiting for the Messiah. So they believe in the coming of the Messiah also. And then in our tradition we have the Mahdi, which is shared by the Sunni and the Shia. And some ulama reject that, but the hadith, La Mahdi illa Isa, there's no Mahdi except for Isa, is not a strong hadith in relation to the other hadiths. And the Mahdi is very strong. That a man comes by the name of Muhammad ibn Abdullah towards the end of time. كيف بكم إذا إمامكم منكم. How are you? And in the Sahih collection of Imam Muslim and others mention, the Prophet ﷺ mentions about the Imam who will pray, and then Isa alayhi salam will actually defer the prayer to the Imam al-Mahdi as well. So the Mahdi is mentioned in our tradition. And then you also have these giant type sinkholes where there's a khasf, three of them that occur on the planet. And these are going to be very large, where just people are swallowed up into giant sinkhole type situations. So, the lesser signs have been happening for a long time. The major signs, as far as we know, none of them have happened yet. But the Dajjal is the most serious of all of them. And the Dajjal is who's called Masih al-Dajjal. Some of the narrations call him Masih al-Dajjal, which is the dot over the ha letter makes it a kha. So it indicates this, it's something very slight that makes him an antichrist as opposed to a Masih, like a Messiah. So he's the imposter Messiah, or the deformed Messiah. And that has different qualities. I mean, one of them, according to the hadith, there's 30, Thalathuna Dajjal, before the major one. And they will claim prophecy, and so these are imposters, Dajjajila. Right? Thalathuna Yadda'a Nabuwa. Each one will claim he's a prophet. And we've had that happen in our tradition. Mirza Ghulam claimed to be a prophet. I mean, the Ahmadiyya are split because you have the Lahoris and the Qadiani, and the Lahoris are not. They're considered Muslim. They're not outside of Islam. So it's important to distinguish between the Ahmadiyya. They're not the same. The Anjuman Lahori Ahmadiyya, who followed Maulana Muhammad Ali, are different from the Qadianis, who claim that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was a prophet. وَلَا نَبِيَّ بَعْدِي. There's no prophet after me. And Isa is not a prophet after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ because he came before him historically. It's a return. And he doesn't abrogate the Sharia of the Prophet ﷺ. The only thing that he does is he removes jizya, and the Prophet did that because he said that he would do that. So, there's false prophets that come. And you can see people following people that claim to be prophets. And also anybody that claims to be the Mahdi is not the Mahdi. I mean, that's the sign that they're not the Mahdi. Because the Mahdi himself will deny it. People will force him into bay'ah. He'll say, it's not me. So anybody who says, I'm the Mahdi, is ipso facto not the Mahdi. Now, Ibn Ata'illah mentioned that his Shaykh, who was a very righteous man, Abu Abbas al-Mursi, he said that one of the blessings Allah gave him is he never denied anybody. Like, lam yunkar ala ahad. He just didn't make inkar on anybody. And somebody came to him once, told me he was the Mahdi, and he said, MashaAllah, you're not the Mahdi I read about in the books, but you might be some Mahdi that I don't know about. They said about Imam al-Maziri, the great Tunisian Imam, من سعة علمه كاد أن لا ينكر على أحد. He had so much knowledge, he rarely ever condemned anybody's actions. Because he would say, لعله على مذهب فلان, maybe he's on the madhab of so-and-so. I mean, people forget that bigger your knowledge, the more tolerant you get, because the religion is so vast. So anyway, I want to open it up for some question. Go ahead. I guess they're going to use the microphone. So right here, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. You mentioned in Surah Al-Saf, in the Torah, it says the name Ahmed. Is there any wisdom that it's Ahmed and not any other name?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, yeah. I mean, Ahmed is the Prophet's name in heaven. So on Yom Al-Qiyamah, he's Ahmed. And the Shafi', which is the Paraclete, he's Ahmed al-Shafi'. So the Paraclete would go with Ahmed. So obviously, Isa probably said something like Ahmed al-Shafi'. And what remains is Shafi'. So Allahu Alam. But Ahmed is one of the names of the Prophet ﷺ. He's Ana Ahmed. He's Al-Qasim, he's Al-Mahi, he's Al-Aqib, he's Ahmed, he's Muhammad. I mean, these are his names. In the Muwatta, those are the 5 big names that Imam Malik gives in the Muwatta. So those are all names of the Prophet ﷺ. Ahmed is one of his names, undeniably.
Assalamu alaikum. When you talked about how in the Bible verse, are you the Messiah, are you Elijah, are you prophet? Well, you mentioned
about the immortals.
Yeah, about the immortals. I've never heard of that, so can you expand on that? Thank you.
Many societies believe in immortals. Chinese, the Taoist tradition believes in immortals. These are people that don't have natural lifespans. They live for very, very long periods of time. The Prophet ﷺ said in a Sahih hadith that in 100 years, everyone on the face of the earth will be dead. And so the ulama who reject the immortals use that as their proof. So it's a khilaf issue. The umum is often used when you use a general statement like kullu ma alayha fan, or something like kullu shayn halikun illa wajhu. Everything is halik illa wajhu. You have, different types of qasr. You have haqiqi and idafi. And when you study balagha, these things aren't simple. In rhetoric, you have different, and usul also. You have different, sometimes a general statement is made, but there are exceptions to it. It's not always everything included in that. So it's, most of the ulama classically have argued that Al-Khidr is a genuine immortal. And many people have claimed to have met with him. People like Abu Madin al-Ghawth. It's kind of hard to imagine these people lying. But like I said, it's a khilaf issue and it's not an aqidah issue. So it shouldn't be an issue where people argue or fight over it. If you want to believe it, there's ulama that said, yeah, that's true. If you don't want to believe it, there's ulama that said, yeah, that's true too. So just those type of situations, you have to allow for difference of opinion and not get caught up in what people believe, about it. Because the aqidah that's mujma' alayha is clear, and then there's certain things in the furu', the branches of creed, that are, there's difference of opinion about them. You just leave people alone. If people want to believe that, that's fine. Ponce de Leon, do people know him? Are people familiar with Ponce de Leon? Pirates of the Caribbean. No, I didn't see that movie. Go ahead. Ponce de Leon was, he was a Spanish conquistador. He came over, but he was looking for what's called the fountain of youth. And the reason is because in Andalusia, the Muslims talked about this fountain of youth. It's mentioned in several Andalusian texts. And they believed it was in the West. And they believed that Al-Khidr drank from that fountain, which is why he was an immortal. There's also in Plato, in one of the dialogues, they mention the fountain of youth also, and that Plato talks about the immortals who drank from the fountain of youth. So these are, Allahu Alam, they may be legends. I don't know. But there are ulama that historically have taken them seriously. Imam al-Sawi, in his commentary on the Jawhara of Imam al-Laqani, mentions that Elijah, al-Khidr are immortals, and that the Jews share that belief with the Muslims. So he actually argues that they're there. Wallahu alam. Allah knows best. Go ahead. Yeah.
You mentioned yesterday that eventually the Islam will leave the earth.
Yeah.
So could you please just tell us if it was inferred from the Quran or Sunnah, so Hadith? And the second question is that every day Muslim people are praying not to be here for the major signs like al-alamat al-kubra.
Yeah.
So if any will not be here, so maybe we can just stop to pray? Is it because we will leave
the alamat al-kubra though precede the sa'a. They don't happen with the sa'a. So the Dajjal comes, there's still Muslims around.
Okay.
And then there's a period of of a lot of belief. And then after that, it goes to disbelief. So, that's the scenario that's given. In terms of the hadith, it says, لا يبقى على وجه الأرض من يقول الله الله لا تقوم الساعة حتى لا يبقى على الأرض من يقول الله الله. The end of time won't come until there's nobody left saying Allah. And the Prophet said, لا تقوم الساعة إلا على شرار الخلق. The end of time won't come except on the worst of humanity. And if there's believers, you don't call them shirarul khalq. So, but a lot of these hadiths are, you have to say Allahu alam what they mean, because they're difficult to. And the Christians have the same problem with the Book of Revelations. I mean, I think ours are clearer than theirs, but these are a lot of them are very difficult hadiths, and you have to be careful with them because they can be interpreted a lot of different ways. And like I said, ulama will tend to interpret something literally before they'll go figuratively. But figurative interpretations are part of our tradition. We're not literalists per se. I mean, a literal tradition is always the safest way to go. But the possibility, like they talk about in the end of time, people's hearts die. Ibn Abi Jamrah says that can be taken figuratively or literally. People's hearts die figuratively, metaphorically. In other words, their spiritual heart is dead. But it can also be taken literally, like literally heart attacks, which are heart deaths. So, go ahead. Don't want to be, I need to get, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I know that you mentioned that we shouldn't be using credit cards anymore, and one of the reasons was because they charge 4%, which they shouldn't be charging, but isn't that because it's a service? And could you just expand on why we shouldn't be using credit cards?
Look, credit cards now, if you travel, if you do anything, it's almost impossible to get by without a credit card, because you can't rent a car without a credit card. You can't do a lot of things without it. It's very hard to go to hotels now without a credit card. And carrying cash is difficult for people. It's more dangerous. But credit cards should be like just emergency type. They shouldn't be. I wouldn't use debit cards or credit cards just in place of cash. Even all the, if you look on these websites about how to get out of debt and how to save money, they all say use cash. Stop using your credit card. Because, when you start putting that money out like that, it's ouch. It's different from giving this little plastic card. Whoosh, they swipe it. You don't feel what's actually leaving. It's all digital numbers on your thing. So credit cards are, and it's not a service charge. I mean, they're making it's so outrageous what they're doing. I mean, it's even in our country, I don't know about Canada, but in our country, there's constantly lobbying, trying to get them to shut down a lot of the skimming that these banks do, because they just get you every which way. So it's not like service charge, it's not costing them anything. It's all computerized. I mean, these are all programs. I mean, 4% of a transaction is a lot to take. It's a lot, and the merchant has to pay it. That's what. But the merchant passes that fee on to you. So even though you're using cash, you're still paying for that 4%. So when you use your credit card, they're getting you from both ends. The merchant's getting you, and the bank's getting you, and that's called in my country, it's called getting screwed. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. I just have a question. Yesterday you were talking about just polemicist traditions of wanting to argue with Christians and Jews and these debates, and how that's kind of, I think, traditionally we like to do that. So because historically sometimes people have gone to those debates, but then they just kind of accepted the fact that no one's necessarily going to come out of the debate in a different religion. How can we, especially on campuses where you have a lot of dawah and which is really good, mashallah, but sometimes it does have that kind of underlying motive. So how do we kind of pull ourselves away from that need to do that? Because it's not really necessarily necessary.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question. I think a lot of the problem is Muslims have been so attacked for so long. And we've been kind of the brunt of this Christian onslaught. making fun of our religion, saying things about our Prophet ﷺ. And there is certainly a certain type of Christian that indulges in that. But if you look at the Christians that do that, they're like the Muslims that do the same thing on the other side. They're uneducated. They're usually very provincial in their outlook. And they're pretty much against everybody. So it just, the Prophet ﷺ was very gentle with people. He أدعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. I mean, even the ulama say those three are different types. Imam al-Ghazali says they're based on the different types of people. There's an interesting, how many people have read Malcolm Gladwell? A lot of people, huh? Did people read The Tipping Point probably? How many people read What the Dog Saw? Less. Yeah. Anyway, Malcolm, does anybody know about his friend, I think his name's Charlie Moskowitz, the food tasting guy? Spaghetti, ragu spaghetti, prego. This guy, he's a psychophysicist, these people that do metric physics, where they measure things, and they're used in food industry to get the right ingredients in processed food. You have to have exactly the right. It's why Starbucks coffee tends to taste the same wherever you go in any Starbucks, because they do it based on these psychometrics. But anyway, Moskowitz, they wanted to make the perfect Pepsi, and Moskowitz took him a while to realize it, but he realized that there wasn't a bell curve. It just didn't work. You didn't get this dominant group of people in the middle. The plots were all over the place. And basically what he realized is that people tend to fall into three categories. It's very common. And these categories are mentioned, even the believers fall into three categories. The ظالم لنفسه مقتصد وسابق بالخيرات ثم أورثنا الكتاب الذين اصطفينا من عبادنا. We inherited the book to those who we have chosen from our servants. فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. Among them are wrongdoers against themselves, but yet they're still chosen. And then amongst them are the muqtasid, the people that are middle. They do good, and then the sabiqu bil khairat bi'idhnillah, then there's the outstrippers. All of those, the believers make up those three categories. One of the most beautiful books, I think, ever written in the history of Islam was a book called Sunan al-Muhtadin by Sidi al-Mawaq. And it's really, to me, one of the most important books that I've ever read. And it's based on that verse. And what he argues is that Amr bin Ma'ruf and Nahi an al-Munkar, when you enjoin right and forbid evil, it should be based on recognizing these different categories of people. So when you speak to somebody who's a dhalimun li nafsi, you don't use the same logic of the person who is sabiqun bil khairat. He says if you have somebody drinking alcohol, he'd be better off teach him a musical instrument. Because he says that alcohol and music are very similar, and they are. And that's why they often go together. And if you look in the hadith about condemnation of music, almost every single one of them has alcohol in the same hadith. Because, as we know, even in this culture, music and alcohol tend to go together. People go and they get high. They go to the concert or listen to music. They have their drinks. That's part of the whole experience. So, he says, get them doing this. Or, like Ibn Taymiyyah when he was with his students and they saw the men playing backgammon, and he said, no, leave them. He said, if you take that away from them, they'll start backbiting. So in other words, it's a good thing for their level. But you don't want the imam or the hafiz of Quran sitting around playing chess all day long. Right? So that type of person, you should tell him, you shouldn't be playing chess. But another person, it's actually a good thing for them. And that type of fiqh is unfortunately very rare in our community. But Sidi al-Mawaq wrote an entire book based on understanding those different qualities. So the Quran, when it talks about da'wah, it has three different groups. Call with hikmah, with wisdom, and because there's a certain type of people that you need an intellectual discourse, Because hikmah here is using the intellect. Hikmah in pre-modern formation was the highest level of knowledge. You had science, understanding, and then wisdom. That's the highest. Science is like information. It's what you get on Google. Science is knowing the rules of grammar. But hikmah is using language for the right reasons, for wisdom. So, speaking to people at that level, there are certain people that you engage intellectually. And then there's certain people, the maw'idah, it's more emotional. You speak to them at more of an emotional level because they're not as rational. I mean, Dr. Ramadan kept saying, set aside your emotions, right? Because he's like a rational type person, but the majority of people aren't rational, and they're not going to set aside their emotions. Most people are very much in the emotional realm. And those type of people, you have to speak to them in a certain way. And then also knowing temperament. Right? A lot of us don't think about temperament, but the amsija are real. People have different temperaments. Traditionally, in the Islamic tradition, you had 4 temperaments. The Safrawi, the Saudawi, the Balghami, and the Demawi. And like each person has an underlying temperament, and then they usually have a secondary temperament. And these define your personality. So a Safrawi person, they get angry easily. It's just their nature. And you might be one of those people, but people in your family that the slightest thing sets them off. And then you have a Balghami person who's just like, you can hit them over the head with an axe, and they're just like, it's okay, man, I'm fine. They're just, everything, it's all mellow, and I'm fine, everything's okay. What's everybody so upset about? Right? And then you have Demawi with very cheerful personality, very outgoing, open. And Saudawi is a melancholic. They're more sad. They tend to be more academic, a lot of sadness. I mean, there's people that are just sad. It's like, why are you sad? I don't know. They say that to you. I don't know. Just feel sad. It's actually a mizaj. It's their... Now, the nice thing about knowing about the amzija, and Imam al-Ghazali says, you have to know the amzija if you're going to teach. He actually says it's a condition of being a teacher. We've got teachers with kids like that in their classrooms, and they don't get it. That you can't talk to Safrawis in certain ways the way you talk to a Saudawi or a Balghami or a Demawi. We call these in English, they're called melancholic, sanguine, phlegmatic, and choleric. Those are the older terms. But, they're real. The amzija are very real, these temperaments. In fact, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, when we were in Kuwait, he said something a few years ago that just really amazed me. He said to me, we were just sitting talking, waiting in the airport, and he just said, he said most of the troubles in the world are actually, he said, mashakil al-amzija. They're just problems of temperament. They're people's temperament. I mean, even like people, like you have people, they say, Sufi people are always ragging on Wahhabis. Wahhabis are always ragging on Sufis. But the truth is, if you get a Wahhabi Balghami and a Sufi Balghami, they'll get along fine. And if you get a Safrawi Wahhabi and a Safrawi Sufi, they're going to start fighting. It's just temperament. I mean, I have good friends in Saudi Arabia, Medina, and they're Salafi. They're friends of mine. I mean, I go visit them when I go to Medina. They're teachers at Medina University. They like me. They know my background. They know where I studied. They know who I studied with. Do you know? And they're fine. They're just, because their mizaj is fine. They're not a problem. But then you get this guy who's foaming at the mouth, saying you need to correct your aqidah. And it's like, what's your problem? And the same is true on both sides. It's not just, they're all bad over there. No, on both sides. You have polemicists and all these people. And, it's amzija. Like, I generally like people, my nature. I don't box people in because somebody's like this, that, or the other. That's not the way I look at people, because to me those things they change. You can be in one state of mind, and then you see them 5 years later, and it's a completely different state of mind. And they might have abandoned all their... I've had people come to me and say, profusely apologize for slandering me and backbiting and all these things. And well, that was where I was at back then, And I said, okay, fine. It's not a problem. I'm okay with it. أَيَعْجِزُ أَحَدُكُمْ أَنْ يَكُونَ كَأَبِي ضَمْضَمْ. Is one of you incapable of being like Abu Damdam? He used to go out every day. وَكَانَ يَتَصَدَّقُ بِعِرْضِهِ. He used to give the bad things that people said about him in charity back to them. Because you get, if people speak ill of you, you get their hasanats. So he used to give it back to them as charity. That's a hadith, Abu Damdam. Prophet said, you're not capable of being like Abu Damdam. So, in da'wah, you have to really be aware that there's different types of people that are going to react differently. It's not, you can't do this speech that you give every single person you meet. Right? You've memorized this speech, and then it doesn't work like that. Some people you need to talk to a certain way, other people a different way, and that's wisdom, knowing to do that. And then the whole idea of having to prove you're right. I mean, what a sad state of affairs if you're always having to prove you're right. My religion's better than your religion. I mean, just alhamdulillah, you're a Muslim, you should be happy. And you should want for others what you want for yourself. That's true. But if they don't want it, don't shove it down their throat. I mean, I would want to share my religion with other people, but I know there are going to be people that they're happy with what they have. And there are people, I guarantee you, look, there's people that are Christian right now, they're really content. They have peace of mind. They go to bed with peace of mind. They're happy. Their religion's working for them. And you say, oh, they're mushrik, they're going to hell. Well, first of all, you don't know where they're going, right? You just don't. But second of all, they're just not looking for something. But if you meet, there are many people out there that are genuinely looking for something. They're really looking. They want to find the truth. And if you can help them on that path, then that's wonderful. But this might not be the truth they're looking for. May the best da'wah win. So I just, I would really be careful about polemics. One of the students I had years ago at Zaytuna, she was with a very political group, and they were very militant. And, the guys used to wear combat boots to university. And, I mean, this type, the Palestinian thing around the neck and, free Palestine with a fist, in the air and on their badge. And she was there, and they were shouting, down with Israel, and down with this, and down with that. And this is Berkeley, it's California. This girl walked by, and she just looked at them. She said, I don't know what you guys are about, but the vibe I'm getting is just, it's very hateful. And she just walked away. And this girl it really had an effect on her. Because it's just not how you win people over. The Prophet ﷺ did not have a hateful, he just wasn't hateful. He really loved people. And he wanted guidance for people. And his Sahaba were tough, undeniably. They were Arabs, and they're desert Arabs. But if you look at what he was doing with them, he was always calming them down. Right? He was always calming them down. And he was always very gentle with people, even his worst enemies. He sat with them, he talked to them, he smiled. And that used to really throw them off. I mean, it actually bothered them. Because he had so much largesse. But that's how you win people over. You don't win them over by spitting and foaming at the mouth and getting... All they see is your psychological state. And the truth is, a lot of these people are just not well, and they're using this, whatever their cause célèbre of the time, whatever it is, they're using that as the vehicle to express that internal disequilibrium that they're feeling in their souls, because they don't have sakina. They don't have peace in their heart. And so they find these outlets. And they'll justify it. Trust me. How can you have peace in your heart? Look what's happening over here. Look what's happening. Welcome to the world. When was it any different? Seriously. I mean, you guys don't know history. it's actually not that bad right now. We're doing reasonably well as a species. It's been much worse. People used to be burnt at the stake for disagreeing with you, right? It's not that bad now. So all this anger and resentment and hatred, and these people need to look into their hearts and ask what's really going on. And a lot of times you'll find it's domestic. They just had a really angry father who just beat them all the time or wasn't very nice to them, and it's just family dynamics. I'm not making this up. I'm telling you the truth, and it's painful, but that's the reality. People need to look themselves in the mirror and ask themselves, why am I like this? Why am I so angry? I mean, somebody came to me the other day who's telling me he's having a crisis of faith, and it's because of what's going on all around the world. I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm doing fine. And it's like why, why is your faith, why isn't it related to your experience of the world? Why is it about somebody? Because if you go to those places where it's really hard, and I've spent a lot of time in those places, those people have the strongest faith. And yet it's all the people that are, really healthy and have a nice house and have everything they need. And they're like, it's hard for me to believe. I mean, look at what's happening in Syria. The Syrians are filled with Iman. They're not having a crisis of faith. They're not having a crisis of faith in Mauritania. Mauritania is one of the poorest countries in the world. I mean, they have famine in a lot of these places. You go and talk to the people. I've been there. I've been to places where there was famine, and they're filled with faith. And then you come here, and people say, I can't believe there's famine all over the world. It's just too hard for me to accept that there's a God. And yet those people dying of starvation are like, mashallah, qaddarullah ma sha. In fact, this is from our sins, subhanallah. So, I just be nice to people, feed them, welcome them. Dawah means an invitation to a feast. And we want to bring the guest in and then shove the food down their throat. I mean, it's not the best way, right? Yeah, to invite people. Go ahead. Let me get out there so people don't think I'm prejudiced about, over there. And I'll get over here. Yeah, you. Go ahead. There were two ladies there. Raise your hands. Yeah, right here, up here, with the pink and the...
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
You mentioned in the convention, you said a quote was, a bad tyrant is better than fitna tadum. Can you please expand on that? And can you also expand on, I think it's a hadith, but I'm not sure, the one that says that khuruj an al-hakim haram?
Yeah.
And is it, with the uprisings that's going on in the Arab world, is it like, it's a period of instability and everything, but is it incumbent on Muslims to actually establish a Muslim state? Like a state that's based on Islamic Sharia?
I mean, there's a lot of questions there. In terms of Sultan al-Ghashum, and there's different versions of that. Sa'atun min 70 sana تحت الظلم خير من ساعة من فوضى, or Sultan al-Ghashum خير من فتنة تدوم. There's different versions of that, but Imam Malik said that. Several of the Imams said that. And that came out of their own experiences with fitan. We know that the Sahaba fought each other. Sayyidina Muawiyah went and fought with Imam Ali, and they met on the battlefield. So that was a fitna. And the Prophet ﷺ, whenever Muslims fight each other, it's a fitna. That's a fitna. When Muslims are defending themselves, it's a ibtila, but it's not a fitna. But when Muslims have to fight other Muslims and they end up killing, I mean, that's a horrible thing. It's bad to kill anybody, but to kill your brother Muslim whose dam is completely haram for you, damuhu haram. The Prophet ﷺ said, كَحُرْمَةِ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا فِي شَهْرِكُمْ هَذَا فِي بَلِدِكُمْ هَذَا. He said, دِمَاؤُكُمْ وَأَمْوَالُكُمْ حَرَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ. Your blood and your wealth are haram like the hurma of Hajj in the Haram, on the day of Arafah. So, I mean, subhanAllah, you can't get much more sanctified than that. So killing believers is a horrible thing, and a lot of people have died in these fitan, and they are fitan. But on the other hand, and I mentioned this, I was interviewed on Al Jazeera, that the rulers have to recognize, you just can't keep pressurizing people. I thought Dr. Ramadan's talk at the, for those of you who saw it on the Arab Spring, it was a good talk. I benefited from it, and I think there were some key points there. One of them was it's not as clear-cut as it appears, that there was definitely, there were elements of control, and the West was involved in that. They didn't start it, and I think he was accurate in that, but they recognized that it was coming. And so they do war games and plan things and try to preempt things. So there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. So we have to be careful as Muslims. I think Syria, the situation there, to go out with weapons is a real problem. If you khuruj ala sultan bis-silah is a problem. And I'm personally, I'm opposed to that type of, I think in the modern world, when the majority of casualties now are civilians, I think it's completely unethical to be using these. I think in the past, there was a lot more honor involved. People went out on battlefields. They fought each other on battlefields and did things. Now, you're looking at just immense civilian casualty. Women and children are often the people that suffer most in these situations. And I think we should do all we can to stop them and prevent them from happening and not encourage them. In a case like Syria, Shaykh Muhammad al-Yaqubi, Allah yahfadhuhu, he took the position, he encouraged the mudaharat, but he encouraged them without weapons. And they love when you use violence because it gives them an excuse to squelch you. And they're very good at that. They're very good at that. So, to protest, you can find Muslims had protests. I would take, Dr. Ramadan mentioned, that ulama have political positions, but they're not fatwas. And he said, like, mudaharat. That's their opinion. I don't agree with that because every action goes under a category in fiqh. You cannot do anything that doesn't have a hukm shara'i. So action, aqeedah is the way you think. It's a thought. Actions go under fiqh. Thoughts go under aqeedah. What you think about God or about His Messenger or about things. But actions go under fiqh. And there are 5 categories. It's either wajib, mandub, mubah, makruh, or haram. And then you have the 6 and 7, salihun and fasidun, in contractual things. It's like marriage. When you make a marriage contract, it could be wajib, it could be mandub. It goes under those 5 categories. But the contract is either salihun or fasid, depending on, it's either a sound contract or it's an invalid contract. But that's the job of the faqih. So a mudahara does have a hukm fiqhi, but you're going to have khilaf about it. So some of the ulama will say, like the Saudi ulama, take a position that mudaharats are haram, and they do, and they put that on fatwas. That's their position. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya said recently, he said, this whole idea that there's sultan, ulama al-sultan, and ulama al-Qur'an. He said, look, there's just ulama, and you have a hukm, and the hukm has adillah. You have a legal ruling, and it has proofs. If a scholar gives a legal ruling that has proofs, then other scholars look at it, and it's either valid or it's invalid. Or it's a valid opinion, but it might not be the opinion that I take. And that's the realm of the scholars. Now, the difficulty that we have today is there's a lot of confusion. First of all, we're living in the internet world, so everything's up on the internet, and everybody's got opinions, and everybody's blogging, and everybody's, an alim today. And so it's getting really confusing for a lot of people, which is a problem. And so the marja'iyah, having reference points is difficult. So you have to find people that you trust. But recognize that much of what scholars will say is ijtihad. It's either ijtihad of previous scholars, like relating an opinion, or it's their own personal ijtihad about any given thing. All right? I mean, the moon calculations is a good example of that. You know, you can read the different views on that, and you know, in certain things you're going to be stuck with having to decide for yourself. But that's the thing about this age. It's people are educated to a certain point, and in the West we don't have like state ulama. You know, we don't have people telling us when it's Ramadan. So there's a situation where you know, you need to think about it yourself and decide for yourself, because you're going to have in Toronto 2 different days to start it. One group's going to start on this day, the other group's going to start on that day. And that is confusing to a certain degree, but on the other hand, it's empowering, because it's giving you the ability to think about an issue. And a lot of people don't want to think. They just rather know, just tell me what to do and I'm fine. I mean, a lot of people want to give up that sovereignty of self and just let somebody else decide for them. So, you know, I think there are definitely fitan going on, and you know, the economies in these countries have been really hit hard. Libya was obviously, I mean, 42 years. The guy was a tyrant, undeniably. I'm a little more sympathetic with, I thought it was horrible what they did to him as well, but I'm a little more sympathetic from a human side, because the people that did that were from Misrata. And if you saw what his forces did to Misrata, I think it makes a little more understanding how they could be filled with so much rage. I mean, it's sad, but it's a very human thing. It's not, I mean, people, that's what humans do. It's when you don't have the prophetic voice there at the time to stop them and calm them down. I mean, that's where you need ulama, and but a lot of the ulama don't, they just write the fatwas to go out and fight. They don't go out and fight anymore, right? I mean, a lot of, you know, people that are in the scholastic tradition now they have too much weight on them to go out and fight, you know, because they eat too much. So, you know, but the early ulama, they went out and fought. You know, Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi fought jihad. Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi died a shaheed in battle. You know, they weren't just writing fatwas, oh yeah, you can go blow yourself up. Why don't you go blow yourself up? You know, the guy writing the fatwa, oh, well, we need ulama. Well, hey, they needed it back then. They were out there fighting. The Prophet ﷺ was out there fighting. Who needs, he's the most needed person in the whole ummah, yet he was out there on the battlefield. Go blow yourself up. Why are you writing these fatwas for 15-year-old kids to go do it? You know, I mean, I really have a problem with these people, personally. I'm sorry. You know, I mean, I respect knowledge, I respect scholarship, but a lot of these people, I don't respect them. You know, I think they've just done this ummah such an incredible disservice from their shoddy thinking, their mediocre educations, you know, the pathetic environments that they come from, and then they're just going to sit there and pontificate about global problems from some village, you know, in Tanta or something. You know, and watch Al Jazeera, and no offense to people in Tanta, you know, but I mean, it's a problem, you know. The Prophet ﷺ said that Allah says, "Inna Allah yubghid al-hibr as-samin." Allah hates fat ulama. You know, it's a hadith. Allah doesn't like fat scholars. No offense to fat people. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, exactly. There's no description of any of the Sahaba being overweight. I mean, there's certain people that have a tribulation with weight, undeniably, and there are Salihin that have that, you know, and that's true, and I'm not going to, you know, in any way diss those people or anything like that. But I'm just talking about people that eat too much. Like, I know one of the awliya who's very heavy set. He doesn't eat anything. You know, he has like a thyroid problem and he's got weight, but it's not from overeating. I'm talking about people that just, the Prophet ﷺ said the believer eats from one stomach and the disbeliever eats from 7. And that came from a man who came and drank 7 bowls of milk, and then the next day he became Muslim and he could only drink 1. And the Prophet ﷺ said that about that. That's what it comes from. It's like your appetite for the dunya decreases with iman. I'm sorry. I feel really, it's just really disheartening when you look at this community and the type of leadership that we have. This is a global community. We don't have any serious universities. We've got scholars. I was at an interfaith dialogue with some of the leading scholars in the Ummah with the Vatican. And one of the scholars prefaced his talk by saying, I don't know if you people believe in the Antichrist, but we have something we call Masih ad-Dajjal, and then he starts talking about, and I'm just thinking, here are these, bishops, and we don't even know their tradition. Like, what are you doing at the table with them when you don't even know their tradition? We used to have scholars that went, and they knew Greek, and they knew, even Taymiyyah knew the Bible forward and backward. If you read his text on the Bible, it's amazing. They were real scholars of incredible caliber and weight. And I'm not putting myself up here as I'm not putting myself up in any way, shape, or form. I don't even consider myself amongst the ulama, But I look at what's out there, and it's very distressing for me personally, And when I read Imam al-Ghazali's Kitab al-Ilm, he talks about the mutarassimun, the formalists, these scholars that are it's all just outward ritual, and there's no depth to their knowledge or understanding. So he was dealing with it at his time. And his book, the Ihya, is against the ulama. And that's the truth. If you read the Ihya, he's basically blaming the whole problem on the ulama. And so we have a problem. We have a problem with our scholars. We have a problem with our rulers. We need help. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa-alaikum assalam.
Okay, so I have kind of 2 questions here. What's your opinion on gay rights? What's your opinion on gay rights? And could you give some proofs for that? And second of all, as you've heard, they're recently trying to ban Sharia law in the United States. So, what should our response, if any, be to that?
Well, first of all, it's the second question first. It's easier. The idea of banning Sharia in America shows you how ignorant a lot of Americans have become about their own country, because the Constitution basically nullifies any law that's unconstitutional. So in Section 8 of the Constitution, it's very clear that you can't have a law that isn't in accordance with the Constitution. So anything that's in the Sharia that's is constitutional is fine. Anything that's not is not the law of the land. And you can't. So this whole idea of banning Sharia, it's crazy. It's un-American, really. Obviously, nobody's going to call for the hudud in America, because the penal codes of Islam apply to Islamic countries. And even those, there's only 4 of them that are agreed upon, and all the other ones, there's debate about them, including Ridda. Ridda's not clear-cut. So there's a lot of nuance in our religion. In terms of gay rights and things like that, in a secular society, it makes perfect sense in a secular society. If you have a society that has a religious foundation and homosexuality is seen as a crime, which it was in the United States when people were Christian. The sodomy laws are still on in some of the states in the United States, but generally, they're just not executed. They're not applied. But it used to be illegal in the United States to have a same-sex relationship. And it was illegal in the United States. Adultery was illegal. And lots of things were illegal that aren't illegal anymore. So things have changed. In terms of Muslims, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, one of the things that he said is, يَكْثُرُ نِكَاحُ الرَّجُلِ بِالرَّجُلِ. One of the signs of the end of time is that you will see a lot of homosexuality and a lot of lesbianism, and the Prophet ﷺ predicted that. And those hadiths could also be interpreted to mean marriage, men marrying men and women marrying women, because nikah can mean marriage as well. So in terms of, for the Muslims, there is a strong opinion in our usul that the furu' of Islam don't apply to non-Muslims. In other words, non-Muslims can pretty much do whatever they want if they're not Muslim. It's their own business. And certainly when they're a dominant group in a country, they have a right to legislate what they want because they're not Muslim, and so they don't believe in Islamic law, and there's no reason why they should adhere to that. In terms of homosexuality, the sexual identity is new to humans because it used to be considered an act as opposed to an identity. So somebody did a homosexual act, but they didn't define themselves as homosexuals. That's a modern concept, sexual identity, heterosexual or homosexual. People were just people, and there was an act like mudaja'a or mujama'a. This is what people did. So if it was man on man, it was called liwata in Arabic, or woman on woman, it's musahaqa, and then in a normal relationship, it was jima' or mujama'a. So those are the terms, but they didn't have this idea of a luti other than the act, all right, and or a musahiqa. Now it's become an identity, like people identify with these things. A lot of this is related to laws in the West because the marriage laws are very one-sided for heterosexual relationships. So people don't get tax breaks when they're in same-sex. And that's where a lot of the legislation. But the best critiques of the gay marriage come from within the gay community. I actually read a book of essays by homosexuals arguing against gay marriage, and it was fascinating to see the perspectives because they were actually vomiting about it, saying this is exactly what we don't want. This is why we're gay, so we don't have to get married. And now they're telling us, oh, let's be just like them. No, that's why we're queer, because we're not like them. So let's stop trying to be like them. And so what they were arguing was, in fact, it was all about the self-esteem of the gay community, that they just want to be accepted and be like, see, we can have happy families with nice kids, and we can have the minivan, and we can be the soccer moms as opposed to soccer mom. So their argument was literally from a completely different perspective, and it was very interesting to see that within that community. So there are people within the gay community that don't want gay marriage. They actually think it goes against everything that homosexuality or lesbianism or whatever it's about. So within their own community, they don't agree on these things. All right. There was an article written by a homosexual from Syria who said, don't impose Western models on us. We've had a thriving community in Damascus for centuries, and we just don't tell anybody about it. It's an underground community, and we're here, and we're okay, and we're not being persecuted, so just leave us alone. So again, that's another perspective. There are places where people don't want to have that out, and there was a time in these countries where people kept that hidden. It was just something, it was their own business. From my own perspective, I just believe in not sexualizing society for children's sake. I think it's a crime against children, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual, to put sexuality out in the open public space. It's something that goes on behind closed doors. Maybe they need to change the laws to get rid of the tax laws altogether. That would solve the problem. But, things should just be, it's people's business, what they do behind their own thing. Unfortunately, we live in a society of spectacle where people want to go out and make out in public and lie on parks. And that's unfortunate because it's sexualizing society. And little children shouldn't have to be exposed to those things because they're still in that innocent stage. They don't need to see open displays of sexuality because it's very confusing for them. And pedophilia is a real problem, too, in this culture because the children are imitative. And they see these things, they'll think they're normal. And then so when the adult starts doing those things to them, they think it's normal because they've seen something out there they don't know. And children are seduced, little kids are seduced to doing it because they don't know. They don't have frames of reference for these things. So unfortunately, I don't think we're thinking at a deep level on these things. But homosexuality is uncompromisingly prohibited in Islam as an act. A person who is a homosexual, in other words, if you have same-sex tendencies, and there might be people in this room, salamakumullah, I don't know, but some people might have that. I mean, statistically, the odds are pretty strong that there is people in this room. That is, that's just, there's people that have impulses to do things that aren't good for them. So it's just something, it's a tribulation that you have, if you have that tribulation, to be attracted to the same sex. But to act on it is sinful. If you act on it, you should just maintain that it's haram and then make tawbah. Don't make something that's haram halal, because that's the worst thing that you can do. And tawbah is always open to everybody, including the homosexual. So, we have what's called in the books of fiqh ma'boon, that is a ma'boon is somebody who's effeminate, and yashtahi al-fahisha. The book says yashtahi al-fahisha. And the prayer is valid, but it's makruh for that person to lead the prayer. So, even some of the fuqaha used to prescribe for people that had these tendencies, they would allow them to actually do certain things that today people would probably be shocked at. But they preferred them doing something with a mechanical device as opposed to doing the haram with somebody else. So they actually called it ubna, which is like the itching disease. And so they would give them, there were fatwas giving people permission to relieve that for themselves, as long as they didn't do it with another person. There was a lot of compassion in our community. I mean, one of the things that really floored me about one of the Mauritanian scholars that we had, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, Shaykh Abdullah Wud Ahmedna, brilliant scholar, faqih. We were at the Islamic school in Hayward years ago, and somebody said they had a homosexual as a relative, and Muslims were telling them to cut them off. And this was a convert. And so, I translated it for him, and I was actually really worried what he was going to say, He didn't even wince. He didn't even wince. He just said, Islam tells us to maintain ties with our disbelieving relatives. And this isn't disbelief, it's an action. And so you shouldn't cut off ties with them. And I just realized that was such a lesson for me in fiqh. That if somebody is really a faqih, you shouldn't worry about posing a question to them, because they'll give you an answer based on real understanding. So, I think there needs to be more compassion in our community, but we have to be unwavering about the prohibition of the act itself. It's prohibited in Sharia. And not just male on male, but male on female. It's prohibited. Dubur, penetration, is prohibited for a male. And the Prophet ﷺ cursed people that did that. Man ata nisa fi mahashihinna. Go ahead. I hope, if anybody's recording this, I want you to erase it. All right, seriously, shart. Erase it. I don't want any of this, given this is for this group, and I don't talk from notes, and I don't talk, and sometimes I talk because I'm a Safrawi, so I know my temperament, and I don't want people to misunderstand certain things, and people who go out and say that I'm dissing fat scholars and things like that, and I'm not. Some of my best friends are fat scholars. Yeah. And I don't want Allah to give me the tribulation, like I get real, and then Allah said, there, you see, now what do you say? And then I'll have to be, I don't eat very much, I swear. Yeah, Because Allah can do that to you, you know. He can just take you and give you the tribulation He gives somebody else. Because these are ibtila'at, you know, so.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. I had a question regards, and I don't know if you can really answer this, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts on this are.
What's that?
My question is in regards to all the prophecies, all the hadiths. I talk about, for example, like the uprooting of the mountains, or the building of the large buildings, or building the structures that may shed a cast or a shadow on the haram and so on. Why are the Muslims, or the Muslim nations, or the Muslims in general, why are we rushing to fulfill these prophecies? Like, why are we, knowing what we know, knowing these ahadiths, why are we fulfilling them?
It's amazing. I agree, you know. Why? I totally agree. The question is a really valid question, and I have no answer for it. Other than that hearts die. You know, people can be spiritually dead and the things don't affect them anymore. It's like people now, they watch the most horrendous things on the news, and they watch like people being killed in Syria on YouTube and things, and then they go have dinner, and it's just no big deal. You know, I mean, traditionally the ulama said it's makruh to mention death over food. You can mention it after food, but during food you should mention it, because if you mention it and you still have an appetite, then your heart's dead. It's a sign your heart's dead. So, go ahead. Right there.
Assalamu alaikum. Could you just elaborate on the core values of the Sufi madhab? Because I've heard a lot of negative and positive, but I haven't done much of my own research. And also, as to why for reviving the Islamic spirit, from what I know, it gets like a lot of backlash from the Salafi community. So I was just wondering,
a Sufi thing.
Yeah, if you could just elaborate on that for me.
You know, tasawwuf as a science is one of the 12 sciences that Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi in the Muqaddimah of his Tasheel, and he's a agreed upon scholar of tafsir. There's nobody that rejects him in the Sunni tradition as one of the great mufassirun. His book's used in Medina University. He said that tasawwuf is one of the 12 sciences that people have to know, because he said the Quran lahu ta'allaqun bit-tasawwuf. So, and then he actually has a book on which I taught in Medina called Tasfiyat al-Qulub, the refinement of the hearts, about the tasawwuf of Quran. So that's part of our tradition, which is tazkiyah of the nafs, but obviously, you know, the madhab of the people of tasawwuf is there are different groups, and you have what are called turuq, because turuq is not equated with tasawwuf. I mean, there's some people that will equate it with tasawwuf, but there are people that historically had no turuq, and yet they were part of the community of tasawwuf. Ash-Shatibi says in the I'tisam that he says that the first people were called Sahaba, and then the people that followed them were called Tabi'un, and then the people that followed them were called Tabi'u Tabi'in. And then he said after that, it would have been cumbersome to say Tabi'in. So they needed a word to describe the people that were on the behavior of the first community, so they called them Sufiya. And so in the early part of Islam, the Sufiya were actually seen as like the real adherents to the traditional way. Hasan al-Basri said that التصوف كان التصوف اسما حقيقة بلا مسمى والآن أصبح مسمى بلا حقيقة. So already during the Tabi'in, he's saying it was a reality without a name. Now it's a name without a reality. Now he was obviously exaggerating, but the ulama have always decried the fact that tasawwuf was waning and the Sufis were watered down. And then they distinguished between the Sufiya and the Mutasawwifa. The Mutasawwifa were people that imitated the Sufiya, but weren't really practicing what they practiced. Imam Malik was asked about a people, يأكلون كثيرا ثم ينشدون في القصائد ثم يرقصون. You know, he said they ate a lot, then they would recite qasidas, and then they would dance. And he said, أَمُسْلِمُونَ هُمْ? You know, are they Muslims? And he said, this is in Tartib al-Madarik. He said, and they said they call themselves Sufis. He said, أَمُسْلِمُونَ هُمْ? قال نعم. قال أَصُبْيَانْ هُمْ? Are they children? He said, لا فيهم شيوخ. He said, amongst them are sheikhs. And in Qad Iyad said in the riwayah that Imam Malik ضحك ضحكا شديدا, and he laughed very hard. And then he got up and he just walked out. And somebody that was in the gathering said, you really disturbed the Imam, because I've been sitting in this majlis for 20 years, I never saw him laugh like that. You know, and they say Sharul Bariya Yudhik, you know, the worst types of tribulation make people laugh. So it obviously bothered Imam Malik, you know, that. So, you know, and you'll find like Tarbisu Ibris, Ibn al-Jawzi wrote against the people of Tasawwuf of his time. But Ibn al-Jawzi himself was a man of Tasawwuf. So, it's, you know, and the ulama will go to extremes when they see the community at extremes. But, you know, Imam al-Ghazali, radiallahu anhu, he really kind of answered the question for the majority of Muslims in the Ihya, bridging the outward and the inward, that sound tasawwuf is based on sound aqidah and sound fiqh. The statement that Ibn Ajiba attributes to Imam Malik in the Sharh of the Hikam, when he says, من تفقه ولم يتصوف فقد تفسق ومن تصوف ولم يتفقه فقد تزندق ومن جمع بينهما فقد تحقق. The people that learn fiqh but don't learn tasawwuf, in other words, purification of the heart, they become fasiq, you know, like a profligate or a reprobate. And the people that learn tasawwuf and don't learn fiqh, they become heretic. And the people that join the two, they have realization. And Imam Shafi'i in his Diwan, and it's a sound attribution to Imam Shafi'i, he said, كن فقيها وصوفيا وليس واحدا فإني وحقيه إياك أنصحه. Be a faqih and a Sufi, but not one without the other. And I'm giving you good advice about this. And he also said, تعلمت من الصوفية أمرين. I learned from the Sufis two things. I learned الوقت كالسيف إن لم تقطع به قطعك ونفسك إن لم تشغلها بخير شغلتك في الشر. I mean, that's all you need to know, really. He said, time is a sword. If you don't cut with it, it cuts you down. And your soul, your ego, if you don't preoccupy it in good, it will preoccupy you with evil. You know, so, and then Bishr al-Hafi, who was amongst the Sufiya, used to visit Ahmed. And when he left one day, one of the people in the gathering said, "Ilmuhu qalil." You know, he doesn't have a lot of knowledge. In other words, outward knowledge, because these were great scholars. And Ahmed said, "Wayhaka, you know, watch out." He said, وَهَلَ الْعِلْمِ يُتَعَلَمْ إِلَّا لِمَا وَصَلَ إِلَيْهِ بِشَرٍ. Do you learn knowledge for anything other than what Bishr has arrived to? In other words, piety is not having lots of knowledge. It's having, you know, taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, you know, tasawwuf is part of Islam. The turuq historically played a very important role in the history of Islam and in spreading da'wah. I mean, anybody from the subcontinent, from India, knows the role of the Sufis in spreading Islam amongst the Hindus, amongst the Buddhists. It was the Sufis, you know, the Chistiya, and these different Naqshbandiya, all these different groups that used to go to places. The same is true. The Qadiriya spread Islam in Europe. The Bogomils were converted by Qadiri Sufis. Even Ibn Taymiyyah in one of his books says that the Sufiya played a major role in the spread of Islam. Like, he admits that. And Ibn Taymiyyah himself was a Qadiri. He followed the Qadiri tariqah, and that's been proven historically. So the idea somehow that these things were a bid'ah, no, they're madhab, just like you have Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, Hanafi, and then you have Maturidi, Ash'ari, Athari. You also have madhab, you have Shadhri, Naqshbandi, Qadiri. You have different spiritual paths for tazkiyah of nafs, and they do exercises and things for their students. So this was part of the Islamic tradition. Undeniably, a lot of innovation came in, a lot of problems, a lot of phony sheikhs, a lot of sheikhs that would inherit it from their father, and then the grandson, and which happens rarely in tasawwuf. Do you have a sanad amongst the Sufiya where a son, the Wafas are the only ones in the Shadri chain, where Ali Wafa and his son. That's very rare. So, and then people know, if you're from Pakistan or India, about a lot of these peers that just, they manipulate people and take their money and write, hijabs and things, and yafuk al-jadu, sahar. They go and do things. And, a lot of them, they're either deluded or they're charlatans. It's as simple as that. And to deny that, I think you're just denying reality. I mean, there's people that want to just have a good opinion of all these people and things like that, but it's not true. Some of these people are really, they're not good people. And I've had run-ins with people like that. And we had a complete charlatan come to our community once, and he was actually doing, as far as I can tell, he was doing some kind of jaddu on people himself, claiming that he was freeing them of jinn. And I mean, whenever you meet these people, say, oh, you've got some jinn problems, I can clear it out of your house and stuff like that. None of the ulama that I've been around have ever talked about stuff like that. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, and then the other thing is they're self-effacing. I mean, this whole idea of making claims is very problematic. To make claims is a dangerous thing. I mean, some of the great awliya did, undeniably, but it's a very dangerous thing to make claims. So, I would just be very careful about what's out there. But there are undeniably valid teachers out there that do know tasawwuf. I'm not going to deny that. But my warning to you is be very, very careful. Go ahead, Faizan. Okay. Yeah, you got a microphone. Go ahead.
Thank you. Before you said about fat people, and that's wrong.
And I acknowledge that. I totally accept it. And I take it back.
It's okay. It's not mean for everyone in Canada. The health choice.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people, yeah. I agree with you. That's why I took it back.
It's okay. It's for everyone.
I made a mistake. You forgive me?
Yeah. And by the way, my second question about steroids.
About what?
Steroids.
Steroids.
For making muscles and guns, those stuff. This one guy, he died on TV. His name is Chris Benoit. He actually died from steroids. And he probably killed his wife and his kids. And he probably hanged himself in the basement. For real.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
That's my friend, Faizan. Yeah. Yeah. I know, but it is a tribulation, and it's part of this time, because unfortunately a lot of the food is causing this. It's actually genetically, it's in the food. Like genetically modified wheat is causing obesity problems. The corn syrup is causing obesity problems. So people are actually victims of a certain global food industry that's causing a lot of these problems. And then also the fact we just don't work anymore. So there's a lot of problems. And you have to be really tricky, and I don't want to give the wrong, because I don't judge people on weight. I really don't. I don't make, when I meet people, I don't, make any judgments about people, about weight, because I know that some people genuinely have conditions where it's beyond their control. So I don't judge them. But I do, unfortunately, I do have real problems with some of these modern scholars that are so quick to give fatwas about things like suicide bombing and stuff like this. And they're the last people that will go out and actually, fight on the front lines with these people. I mean, it really bothers me that it's just so, blood is just so trivialized. And there's people dying right now because people telling them, go out and, go out and do this. And then there's people in places like here, rallying for this stuff. People are getting shot down in the streets, literally, without any of the dignity of, it's really beyond belief. And for me personally, I'm against shedding of innocent blood in any way, shape, or form. And anything that will stop that shedding is very important. And the idea somehow that things are going to get better, all we have to do is get rid of rulers, I don't buy that argument, because I know history. It just doesn't work like that. Gaddafi came in as a reformer. People were dancing in the street when Gaddafi showed up. And a lot of all these revolutionary movements, people forget King Farouk. When King Farouk was the ruler of Egypt, the pound was stronger than the dollar. The Egyptian pound. It was stronger than the dollar. Now, it's, what is it, like 6 pounds to a dollar? It's 6. It's the opposite. It used to be, you used to get $6 to an Egyptian pound during Farouk's time. Purchasing power of the Egyptian pound is like nothing. Those people are really suffering. I mean, incredibly. And that's why, it's easy for us to sit here and pontificate about all this stuff, but there's real human suffering going on. And I think a lot of our scholars are living in bubble worlds and very abstracted from what's on the ground, like what people are really going through in their lives. They're just disconnected from it. And it's a problem for all of us. But it's very difficult now in a lot of these countries, and it's going to get more difficult. It's not going to get easier for them. It's going to get more difficult. The economy has been destroyed in Egypt. We're looking at several years of real hardship. People needing aid and things like that just to get by. And, Syria, may Allah help them. Sham is one of the great blessed places of the planet. And the Syrians deserve better. They do. They deserve better. I mean, the government there's I don't know of any government on the planet that is as harsh. People that can take children and torture them just to send a little warning back home to these, it's beyond belief. But unfortunately, that's the reality of it. So, these are tribulations. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free us from all those tribulations and to make it easy for those people. We should make dua for them, So, anyway, New Year's resolutions. It's 10:30. New Year's resolutions. Who memorized the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ? See, some people have some himma here. Okay, hold on. How many? Come on, hands up. Okay, that's good. But I'm still a little disappointed. I thought everybody would go. It's a blessed thing to know. So let me hear, go ahead. Let me hear you say. Can you bring the microphone there? Yeah. Sayyidina Muhammad ibn.
Okay, Bismillah. Muhammad
ibn
Abdullah ibn Abd al-Muttalib ibn Hisham ibn Abd Manaf ibn Qusay ibn Kilab ibn Murrah ibn Ka'b ibn Lu'ay ibn Ghalib ibn Fihr ibn Malik ibn Nadr ibn Nadr ibn Kinana ibn Khuzaymah ibn Mudrika ibn Mudrika ibn Ilyas ibn Ilyas ibn
Mudar.
Trying to get it here. Okay. Ibn Ilyas ibn مضر ابن مضر ابن زار ابن معاد ابن عدنان ابن كنانة ابن إسماعيل ابن إبراهيم.
Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillah. Now you have to do them every day for a while till it sticks in your memory. Just do it every day, like so you don't forget it. Yeah, but it's really a blessing to know the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, some of the ulama really emphasize that every Muslim should know the lineage of his Prophet ﷺ. Alhamdulillah. That's really nice that you did that. So, astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. May Allah forgive me anything I said. I didn't mean to offend anybody. Wallahi, I don't like to offend people. And I apologize if I did. I'm just really sensitive about what's happening in the ummah right now. It's very troubling to me. And so may Allah bless all of you, inshallah. And closing session is tomorrow, but I hope it's been beneficial. I hope thinking about these things increase your iman. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.